The transport ship's emergency lights cast everything in blood-red shadows as Sergeant Marcus Webb moved through the twisted wreckage. His helmet display showed 3 hours of oxygen remaining, which meant he had maybe 2 hours before he needed to start worrying. The distress beacon had stopped transmitting 40 minutes ago, but Marcus wasn't the type to turn back just because a signal went dark. The wreckage belonged to a Velkari merchant vessel, identifiable by the distinctive triple-hull design that the insectoid species favored. The ship had crashed on this unnamed moon 3 days ago, and the Coalition rescue teams had already swept through once, declaring no survivors. Standard procedure said Marcus should be back on his transport right now, filing reports and moving on to the next disaster. But Marcus had learned long ago that standard procedure and reality didn't always match up. His grandmother used to say that rules were written by people who'd never been in the situations those rules were meant to cover. She'd been a rescue worker back on Earth during the California quake swarms, and she'd taught Marcus that sometimes you had to trust your gut more than your equipment. His gut said someone was still alive in this wreck. The Velkari were relatively new to the Coalition, having joined only 15 years ago. They were traders and merchants, non-violent by culture and somewhat fragile by human standards. Their exoskeletons provided natural armor, but their internal organs were delicate, and they didn't handle trauma well. The official rescue report said that the 17 crew members had all died on impact, their bodies too damaged by the crash to survive. Marcus had seen the scan data. It bothered him. The crash hadn't been that severe, relatively speaking. The ship had come down at an angle, using its emergency thrusters to slow the descent. Sure, it was still a crash, but it was the kind of crash where you'd expect at least some survivors. The Velkari were fragile, yes, but they weren't made of glass. He squeezed through a gap in the bulkhead, his suit's external lights cutting through the darkness. The ship's main corridor was buckled and torn, with exposed conduits sparking occasionally. His radiation detector stayed quiet, which was good. The last thing he needed was to be tracking through a contaminated wreck. "This is Sergeant Webb checking in," he said into his comm. "I'm at Section 7, moving toward what should be the crew quarters." "Copy that, Sergeant." The voice of Lieutenant Chen came back immediately. "You've got 90 minutes before we need to start prep for departure. The storm front is moving in faster than predicted." "Understood. Webb out." Marcus had served in the Coalition Defense Force for 12 years, and he'd been doing search and rescue for 8 of those years. He'd pulled people out of burning stations, explosive decompressions, and once even from inside a ship that was actively breaking up in a gas giant's atmosphere. He'd seen every kind of disaster the galaxy could throw at sentient beings. He'd also seen what happened when rescue teams gave up too quickly. The Talgoran incident 5 years ago still haunted him. 23 miners declared dead, rescue teams pulled out. And then 2 weeks later, a surveyor had picked up a faint signal. By the time they got back, 19 of those miners were actually dead. The 4 who'd survived those extra 2 weeks had permanent damage that might have been prevented with faster rescue. Marcus wasn't going to let that happen again if he could help it. The crew quarters section was in better shape than the main corridor. The Velkari built their ships with redundant structural supports, which meant that even when the outer hull breached, the interior compartments often stayed intact. Marcus checked his scanner, looking for any heat signatures, any movement, any sign of life. Nothing. He moved from cabin to cabin, checking each one systematically. The Velkari were smaller than humans, which meant their quarters felt cramped to him, even in the best circumstances. In the crashed ship, with debris everywhere and the ceilings buckled, it was like crawling through a collapsed tunnel. The first 6 cabins were empty. The 7th contained 2 bodies, both Velkari crew members still in their crash harnesses. Marcus checked them anyway, confirming what his scanner had already told him. They died on impact, their delicate internal structures ruptured by the sudden deceleration. He found 3 more bodies in the next section, all showing the same fatal injuries. The rescue team's assessment had been correct for these crew members at least. But that was only 5 out of 17. Where were the others? Marcus consulted his suit's map display. The ship's layout showed a lower cargo deck, which the rescue team had marked as inaccessible due to structural collapse. That always struck him as suspicious. Inaccessible usually just meant difficult, and difficult wasn't the same as impossible. He found the access shaft after 20 minutes of searching. The rescue team had been right about the collapse. A main support beam had fallen across the shaft entrance, and debris had piled up behind it. To most people, it would have looked completely blocked. But Marcus had spent 2 years as a combat engineer before transferring to search and rescue. He knew structures, knew how weight distributed, knew how to spot the weak points. More importantly, he knew how to move things that looked unmovable. It took him 40 minutes and most of his suit's power reserves for the external manipulator arms, but he managed to lever the beam aside far enough to create a gap. His suit barely fit through, scraping against metal on both sides, but he made it. The cargo deck was dark and cold. His suit's temperature gauge showed it was well below freezing down here, which made sense. This section had lost hull integrity, and without power for the heating systems, it had quickly equalized with the moon's surface temperature. Nothing could survive in this cold, not for 3 days. The rescue team had been right to mark this section as clear. Marcus was about to turn back when his helmet audio pickups caught something. A sound, faint and irregular. It took him a moment to identify it because it was so unexpected. Breathing. He froze, adjusting his audio filters to isolate the sound. There, behind a stack of cargo containers that had shifted in the crash. Definitely breathing, but wrong somehow. Too slow, too shallow. The sound of someone at the very edge of survival. Marcus moved toward the containers, his heart rate climbing. His medical training kicked in automatically, running through triage protocols. If someone had survived down here for 3 days without heat, without supplies, they'd be in critical condition. Hypothermia, at minimum, probably multiple system failures depending on the species. He found her behind the last container, curled into a ball in the corner where 2 hull plates had buckled together to form a small, protected space. A Velkari female, her carapace showing multiple cracks, her antenna barely moving. She should have been dead. Everything Marcus knew about Velkari biology said she should have frozen to death within hours of the crash, but she was breathing. Barely, impossibly, but breathing. Marcus knelt beside her, his hands surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "Hey," he said softly, knowing she probably couldn't hear him through her own suit. "Hey, I've got you. You're going to be okay." Her eyes opened, just slightly. Velkari eyes were compound, hundreds of tiny lenses working together. In the light from his helmet, they glittered like broken glass. She tried to move, managed a small tremor, then went still again. Marcus keyed his calm. "Chen, I've got a survivor. Velkari female, critical condition. I need immediate medevac prep and get Dr. Yaren on standby." There was a pause, then Chen's voice came back. Professional, but clearly surprised. "Copy that. Confirm you said survivor?" "Confirmed. 3 days in sub-zero temperatures with no supplies. I don't know how she's still alive, but she is. I'm bringing her up now." Marcus didn't wait for a response. He carefully scooped the Velkari up, surprised by how light she was. Even accounting for the moon's lower gravity, she couldn't have weighed more than 30 kilograms. Her suit was damaged, multiple punctures in the material, which explained why she'd been losing heat so quickly. Getting back through the access shaft with her was harder than getting down had been, but Marcus had practice at improvising. He used his suit's emergency tape to secure her to his chest, then pulled himself up one-handed, using the damaged shaft walls for leverage. The trip back through the ship seemed to take forever. Marcus kept checking her vital signs through his suit's medical scanner, watching the readouts with growing concern. Her core temperature was dangerously low, her respiratory rate was depressed, and her hemolymph pressure was barely registering. By every measure, she should already be dead. But humans had learned something important during their first century in the Coalition. The galaxy's definition of impossible and Earth's definition didn't always match up. Humans had survived injuries that would kill most species, had pushed through conditions that should have been lethal, had refused to die when every logical analysis said they should. Maybe, Marcus thought as he carried the Velkari toward the ship's exit, that stubbornness was contagious. He emerged from the wreck to find the shuttle already landing, its engines kicking up clouds of moon dust. The medical team was waiting, Dr. Yaren's 4 arms already reaching for the patient before Marcus had even fully descended the debris pile. "Impossible," Dr. Yaren muttered, his Vex translator rendering his clicking speech into standard. "No Velkari survives 3 days in these conditions. The biological parameters do not allow it." "Well, she didn't get the memo," Marcus said, helping transfer the patient to the emergency gurney. "She's alive, Doctor. That's what matters." Dr. Yaren didn't argue, too busy attaching monitors and administering emergency medications. Marcus watched for a moment, then became aware of Lieutenant Chen standing beside him. "The rescue team did 3 complete sweeps," Chen said quietly. "How did they miss her?" Marcus looked back at the wreck. They were looking in the wrong places. They saw the collapsed access shaft and assumed nothing could have gotten through. They were thorough, but they followed their procedures exactly. "And you didn't." "I followed the most important procedure there is, Lieutenant. The one that says you don't give up on people." Chen was quiet for a moment. "The Velkari Merchant Guild is going to want to know how she survived. This is going to raise questions about the other crew members. Why her and not them?" Marcus had been wondering the same thing. The other crew members had been in supposedly safer locations, properly secured in their crash harnesses, in sections with better structural integrity. This female had been in the worst possible place, in sub-zero temperatures, with a damaged suit. She should have been the first to die, not the last to survive. "I don't know," Marcus admitted, "but I bet when she wakes up, she'll have one hell of a story to tell." The shuttle lifted off 15 minutes later, racing ahead of the approaching storm. Through the medical bay's window, Marcus could see the wreck growing smaller below them, soon to be buried under the moon's perpetual ice storms. In another few weeks, it would be completely covered, invisible to scanners, lost to time. But one life had been saved from that tomb, one impossible survivor who refused to die when everything said she should. Marcus settled into his seat, suddenly exhausted. His grandmother's voice echoed in his memory, something she'd told him during his training. "The galaxy is bigger and stranger than any rulebook can account for, Marcus. Sometimes the only rule that matters is that you don't leave people behind." He looked through the window at the stars beyond. Somewhere out there were thousands of other disasters waiting to happen. Thousands of other people who would need help, need rescue, need someone who wouldn't give up on them. Marcus had 12 years in the Coalition Defense Force. He figured he had at least 12 more to go, maybe 20 if his body held up. That was a lot of time to make a difference, a lot of chances to pull people out of the dark. He closed his eyes, letting the shuttle's engines lull him toward sleep. In the medical bay, machines beeped steadily, monitoring the impossible patient who should have been dead but somehow wasn't. The galaxy kept its secrets close, but sometimes, if you were stubborn enough and refused to accept impossible, those secrets revealed themselves. Marcus had a feeling that this particular secret was going to be worth discovering. The storm hit the crash site 3 hours later, burying the wreck under 10 meters of ice and frozen atmosphere. By morning, there would be no sign that a ship had ever been there at all. But in a Coalition medical facility 3 systems away, A Velkari female who should have been dead would slowly, impossibly begin to wake. The medical facility on Station Kepler 7 was considered one of the best in the Coalition, with staff from 23 different species and equipment capable of treating everything from silicon-based Crystallis to the methane-breathing Vorath. But even with all that expertise and technology, Dr. Yaren found himself completely baffled by his patient. "She should be dead," he said for the 7th time that day, manipulating holographic displays with 2 hands while the other 2 recorded notes. "Every biological model we have says that a Velkari exposed to those conditions for that duration cannot survive. The metabolic requirements alone make it impossible." Marcus stood at the window of the observation room, watching the Velkari female through the transparent barrier. She'd been in the medical facility for 2 days now, and while her condition had stabilized, she still hadn't regained consciousness. The medical team had repaired the cracks in her carapace, restored her core temperature, and addressed the dozen other critical issues that should have killed her. "Maybe your models are wrong," Marcus suggested. Dr. Yaren's antenna twitched in what Marcus had learned was the Vex equivalent of irritation. "These models are based on 40 years of medical research across the entire Coalition. They are not wrong. They simply do not account for whatever allowed this individual to survive." Commander Sarah Okonkwo entered the observation room, her uniform as crisp as always, despite having just come off a 14-hour shift. She was the head of Coalition Search and Rescue for this sector, and she'd taken a personal interest in Marcus's impossible rescue. "Any change?" she asked. "Nothing significant," Dr. Yaren replied. "Her vitals remain stable but depressed. Brain activity suggests she is in a deep restorative state rather than true unconsciousness, but she shows no signs of emerging from it." "The Velkari Merchant Guild has been asking questions," Commander Okonkwo said. "They want to know what happened to the rest of the crew, and they're very interested in how this one survived. There are some who are suggesting that the rescue team was negligent in their initial sweep." Marcus turned from the window. "The rescue team followed protocols. I went off book, that's all. Sometimes that makes the difference." "The Guild is also asking questions about you, Sergeant Webb. Apparently you have something of a reputation for finding survivors that shouldn't exist." It was true. The Talgoran incident had been his first, but there had been others over the years. A Karathi pilot who'd survived 18 days in an escape pod designed for 3. A human colonist pulled from a collapsed dome 30 hours after everyone else had been evacuated. A Centaurian child found alive in a section of station that had explosively decompressed. "I'm thorough," Marcus said simply. Commander Okonkwo smiled slightly. "You're stubborn. There's a difference. But that stubbornness saved a life this time, so I'm not complaining. What I need to understand is how she survived. Because if there's something we're missing about Velkari physiology, something that allowed her to endure conditions that should have killed her, that's information the entire Coalition needs." The question had been nagging at Marcus since the rescue. He'd reviewed everything he knew about Velkari biology, and nothing explained it. Their species had evolved on a warm, humid world with minimal temperature variation. They were adapted for stable conditions, not extremes. Exposure to sub-zero temperatures should have sent them into hibernation at best, death at worst. And 3 days was well beyond their survival threshold. "Maybe it wasn't her biology," Marcus said slowly, an idea forming. "Maybe it was something else." Dr. Yaren's compound eyes swiveled toward him. "Explain." "When I found her, she was tucked into a corner, curled up tight. She'd positioned herself between 2 hull plates that had buckled together. That wasn't random. She chose that spot deliberately." "For protection," Commander Okonkwo said. "More than that. Those plates created a small enclosed space, probably only a few cubic meters. Her body heat, what little there was, would have been trapped in that space, instead of radiating out into the larger cargo hold. It was basically a tiny emergency shelter. Dr. Yaren manipulated his displays, pulling up data. Even accounting for such a space, the heat loss over 3 days would still have been fatal. Unless... He paused, his antenna quivering with sudden interest. Unless she entered a state of extreme metabolic depression, something beyond normal Velkari hibernation. Is that possible? Marcus asked. There are precedents in other species. The Somnathi can reduce their metabolic rate to less than 1% of normal function. The deep swimmers of Thalassia Prime can essentially shut down all non-essential systems for months at a time. But Velkari do not have this capability. It is not part of their evolutionary heritage. Maybe she developed it, Commander Okonkwo suggested. Evolution in action. A mutation, perhaps. Dr. Yaren looked thoughtful. That would require genetic analysis, and it would raise significant questions about Velkari development. If such a mutation exists, it could be valuable for their species' expansion into less hospitable environments. Marcus watched the patient through the window. She looked so fragile, her carapace still showing the marks of repair despite the medical team's best efforts. It was hard to imagine that this delicate creature possessed some hidden capability that had allowed her to survive conditions that would kill most beings. The comm panel on the wall chirped. Dr. Yaren, you're needed in exam room 4. We have a situation with the Karathi patient. Dr. Yaren sighed. Medical facilities, always a situation. He headed for the door, then paused. Sergeant Webb, you have clearance to remain in the observation room if you wish. Perhaps your unique perspective will notice something our instruments cannot. After he left, Commander Okonkwo moved to stand beside Marcus at the window. You've been spending a lot of time here. I pulled her out of that wreck. I want to make sure she makes it the rest of the way. It's more than that. You're curious. You want to know how she survived. Marcus nodded slowly. I've been doing this job for 8 years, Commander. I've seen a lot of impossible things. But this one feels different. She was alone down there in the dark and the cold, and everyone had given up on her. Everyone except her. She refused to die. That takes something special. Humans understand that, Commander Okonkwo said quietly. That refusal to give up even when everything says you should. It's one of the things that makes your species unique in the Coalition. Maybe it's not just humans, Marcus said. Maybe that spark exists in all of us, regardless of species. We just have to be pushed hard enough to find it. They stood in silence for a while, watching the patient. The medical monitors traced steady rhythms, proof of life continuing against all odds. Marcus thought about his grandmother again, about all the people she'd pulled from collapsed buildings and broken cities. She'd always said that the will to survive was the strongest force in the universe, stronger than gravity, stronger than entropy. Looking at the Velkari female, Marcus was inclined to agree. The next morning, Marcus was going through reports in his quarters when his comm buzzed. Dr. Yaren's voice came through, urgent and excited. Sergeant Webb, you need to come to the medical facility immediately. She's awake. Marcus made it there in under 5 minutes, taking corridors at a run. He found Dr. Yaren and Commander Okonkwo already in the observation room, along with 2 other doctors he didn't recognize. Through the window, the Velkari was sitting up in her bed, her antenna moving slowly as she oriented herself to her surroundings. Even through the barrier, Marcus could see the confusion in her movements. She regained consciousness 20 minutes ago, Dr. Yaren explained. Cognitive function appears normal, though she is disoriented and showing signs of memory fragmentation. We have not yet questioned her about the crash. Has she asked about the others? Marcus asked. The rest of her crew? Not yet. She has been focused on understanding where she is and what happened to her. The psychological impact of her ordeal will likely manifest gradually. Commander Okonkwo was studying a datapad. The Velkari Merchant Guild has been notified. They're sending a representative to interview her, but that will take at least 2 days given their current ship positions. In the meantime, Sergeant Webb, since you were the one who found her, I'm authorizing you to conduct the initial interview. Marcus blinked in surprise. Ma'am, I'm search and rescue, not an investigator. You're also the person she owes her life to. That matters. The guild representative can conduct a formal interview later, but right now I want to know what happened on that ship. You have a rapport with survivors that most investigators lack. Use it. Dr. Yaren led Marcus to the patient's room, briefing him quickly. Her name is Talara. She was the ship's junior navigation officer, 23 years old by Coalition standard. This was only her second voyage off her homeworld. She has been informed that you are the person who rescued her, and she has expressed a desire to meet you. The door slid open, and Marcus entered the room. It had been configured for Velkari comfort, with elevated humidity and soft lighting. Talara turned toward him as he entered, her antenna rising in what he'd learned was a gesture of acknowledgement and respect. Sergeant Webb, she said, her voice translated by the room's systems into standard. Her natural speech was a series of clicks and whistles, musical in its own way. Dr. Yaren tells me that you saved my life. I found you, Marcus said, moving closer, but maintaining a respectful distance. The medical team saved your life. I just got you here. Still, without you, I would have died in that cargo hold. The rescue team had already left. I knew no one was coming back. Her antenna drooped slightly. I had accepted death. Marcus pulled up a chair and sat down, making himself less imposing. What happened, Talara? How did you end up in the cargo hold instead of with the rest of the crew? She was quiet for a long moment, her antenna barely moving. The crash happened so fast. One moment we were conducting a routine system transit, and the next, alarms were sounding everywhere. Captain Varix ordered all crew to emergency stations, but the ship was already breaking apart. I was making my way to my station when a bulkhead collapsed behind me, cutting me off from the others. So, you went to the cargo hold? It was the only way forward. I thought perhaps I could reach another access corridor from there, circle back to the crew sections. But when I got there, the ship hit the moon's surface. The impact threw me against a support beam. My suit was damaged, and I felt my carapace crack. I knew I was badly injured. Marcus listened carefully, noting the details. The cargo hold lost hull integrity during the crash. Why didn't you try to make it back to the crew sections where there was still atmosphere? Talara's antenna trembled. I tried. I crawled toward the access shaft, but when I reached it, I saw that it was blocked by fallen debris. I was trapped. And I could feel the cold already starting to seep in through my damaged suit. That's when you found the corner. The space between the hull plates. Yes, I was growing weaker, and I knew I didn't have long. I remembered something my mother told me when I was young. She said that when a Velkari is injured and alone, we should make ourselves small, find a safe place, and conserve our energy. It's an old instinct from before we evolved to full sentience, from when our ancestors were prey animals. Marcus leaned forward. So you followed your instinct. You made yourself small and waited. I didn't think I was waiting for rescue, Talara said quietly. I thought I was waiting for death. But death didn't come. Instead, there was this strange sensation, like falling asleep, but deeper. Everything slowed down. My thoughts became distant. My body felt like it was shutting down piece by piece. Hibernation, Marcus said. Perhaps. But it felt like more than that. It felt like my body was making a choice, deciding which systems were essential and which could be sacrificed. I remember thinking very clearly that I wanted to live, that I wasn't ready to die. And then everything went dark. You were in that state for 3 days, Talara. 3 days in sub-zero temperatures with no food, no water, and a damaged suit. According to every medical database we have, that should have been impossible. Her antenna rose again, quivering with what might have been pride or perhaps just surprise. I am stubborn. My father always said it was my greatest flaw. Perhaps for once, it was my greatest strength. Marcus smiled. Stubbornness has saved more lives than people realize. Trust me, I know. They talked for another hour, with Marcus carefully extracting details about the crash and Talara's ordeal. It became clear that she truly didn't understand how she'd survived. There was no secret technique, no special training. She'd simply refused to die, and somehow her body had found a way to make that refusal a reality. When Marcus finally left the room, Commander Okonkwo was waiting in the corridor. Well? She doesn't know how she survived, Marcus reported, but I believe her when she says she wanted to live. That determination was real. The will to survive, Commander Okonkwo mused. It's a powerful thing. The Velkari Guild is going to want more than that. They'll want scientific explanations, genetic analysis, medical reports, and they'll get all of that. But you and I both know that some things can't be fully explained by science. Sometimes survival comes down to something simpler and more complex at the same time. The decision to keep fighting even when fighting seems pointless. Marcus thought about all the rescues he'd performed, all the survivors he'd pulled from situations that should have been fatal. Commander Okonkwo was right. The common thread wasn't biology or technology or even luck. It was that spark, that refusal to accept defeat. She's going to recover fully, Commander Okonkwo continued. Dr. Yaren says that whatever metabolic changes her body underwent are reversing naturally. In a week or two, she'll be cleared for release. And then what? Does she go back to the Merchant Guild? That's up to her. But between you and me, I suspect this experience has changed her. You don't come back from something like that and just return to normal life. Marcus understood that better than most. Every rescue changed both the rescuer and the rescued. They carried their experiences forward, shaped by what they'd survived, by the choices they'd made in their darkest moments. He returned to the observation room one last time before leaving the medical facility. Through the window, he could see Talara talking with Dr. Yaren, her antenna animated now, no longer drooping with exhaustion and trauma. She was alive. Against all odds, against every prediction and probability, she had survived, and Marcus had a feeling that her story was far from over. 3 weeks after the rescue, Marcus was surprised to receive a message requesting his presence at Commander Okonkwo's office. He'd been back to regular duty, conducting routine patrols and responding to standard emergency calls. The impossible rescue of Talara had faded into just another entry in his service record, remarkable but increasingly distant. When he arrived at the commander's office, he found her seated with 2 visitors. One was a Velkari he didn't recognize, wearing the formal robes that marked him as a high-ranking member of the Merchant Guild. The other was Talara. She looked different from the broken, barely alive being he'd pulled from the wreckage. Her carapace had healed completely, the cracks now barely visible even to his trained eye. Her antennae were erect and alert, her movements confident. She stood when he entered, a gesture of respect that seemed oddly formal. "Sergeant Webb," Commander Okonkwo said. "Thank you for coming. This is Merchant Prince Velak of the Velkari Guild, and I believe you already know Talara." Marcus nodded to both of them. "Merchant Prince. Talara, it's good to see you recovered." "Thanks to you," Talara said quietly. Merchant Prince Velak stepped forward, his antenna dipping in a formal bow. "Sergeant Webb, the Velkari Merchant Guild owes you a debt that cannot easily be quantified. You saved the life of one of our own when all others had given up hope. This is not something we take lightly." Marcus felt uncomfortable with the formal gratitude. I was just doing my job, Merchant Prince. Any member of Search and Rescue would have done the same. But they did not, Velak said firmly. The rescue team conducted their sweep and departed. You alone returned. You alone believed there might still be life in that wreck. The difference between those two actions is the difference between death and life for Talara. Commander Okonkwo gestured to the chairs arranged around her desk. Please, everyone sit. Merchant Prince Velak has traveled from the Velkari homeworld specifically for this meeting. He has some interesting information to share. Once they were seated, Velak activated a holographic display, showing what appeared to be genetic sequences and medical data. After Talara's recovery, we conducted extensive testing with her permission. We wanted to understand how she survived conditions that should have been fatal to any Velkari. What we discovered was remarkable. The display shifted, highlighting specific genetic markers. Talara possesses a rare mutation, one that occurs in approximately 1 in every 50,000 Velkari. This mutation affects how her body responds to extreme stress. When faced with life-threatening conditions, her metabolism can drop to levels we previously thought impossible for our species. She can hibernate, Marcus said. More than hibernate, Velak corrected. She can enter a state we are calling deep suspension. Her body essentially shut down all non-essential functions and redirected all available resources to maintaining her core consciousness and vital organs. It is similar to what some Earth animals do, we understand. Bears, you call them? Marcus nodded. Bears hibernate for months at a time, living off stored fat while their body temperature and heart rate drop dramatically. Precisely. Except Talara's mutation allows for even deeper suspension than bear hibernation. Her body temperature dropped to within a few degrees of the ambient environment. Her respiratory rate became almost undetectable. To any standard scan, she would have appeared dead. Commander Okonkwo leaned forward. How many other Velkari have this mutation? That is what makes this discovery so significant, Velak said. We have begun genetic screening across our population, and preliminary results suggest that perhaps 5% of all Velkari carry some version of this gene, though not all to the same degree as Talara. Most would never know they possessed it because the mutation only activates under extreme duress. The implications were staggering. Marcus thought about all the supposedly impossible survivals he'd witnessed over the years. How many of those had been because of genetic mutations or hidden capabilities that only manifested under the worst possible circumstances? There's more, Talara said, speaking for the first time since they'd sat down. The Guild's researchers believe that this mutation isn't random. They think it's actually a vestigial survival mechanism from our ancient past, from before we became a spacefaring species. Velak manipulated the display again, showing what looked like historical data. 20,000 years ago, our homeworld underwent a dramatic climate shift. Temperatures dropped globally for nearly a century. Most life struggled to adapt. Our ancestors, according to fossil records, developed the ability to enter these deep suspension states during the worst periods of cold. It saved our species from extinction. But as the climate stabilized and we evolved, Talara continued, the mutation became less necessary. Over thousands of generations, it faded from most of the population. But it never completely disappeared. It stayed hidden in our genetics, waiting for the day when it might be needed again. Marcus tried to process what he was hearing. So when Talara was trapped in that cargo hold, facing conditions similar to what her ancient ancestors endured, her body activated this ancient survival mechanism? Exactly, Velak confirmed. Her conscious mind had accepted death, but some deeper part of her biology refused to give up. It is, as you humans might say, evolution in action. Commander Okonkwo looked impressed. This changes quite a bit for the Velkari people. If 5% of your population has this capability, that means thousands of individuals who could potentially survive in environments currently considered too hostile. Indeed. We are already redesigning our emergency protocols and survival training. Ships will now screen crew members for the mutation, and those who carry it will receive specialized instruction on how to deliberately activate the suspension state if needed. Talara's antenna drooped slightly. Though I hope no one will ever need to use it as I did. There was a moment of somber silence. Marcus knew what she meant. Surviving was one thing, but the experience of spending 3 days alone in the dark, waiting for death that never quite arrived, wasn't something anyone would willingly repeat. "There is another matter we wish to discuss," Valak said, his tone becoming more formal. "The Velkari Merchant Guild has a proposal for both Sergeant Webb and for Talara herself." He looked at Marcus first. "Sergeant Webb, your actions have demonstrated something that the Coalition as a whole needs to embrace. You did not simply follow procedures. You followed your instincts, your belief that life might still exist where others saw only death. The Guild wishes to establish a new training program for search and rescue personnel across all Coalition species. We would like you to lead this program." Marcus blinked in surprise. "Me? Sir, I'm just a sergeant. Surely there are more qualified people for something like that?" "There are people with higher ranks," Valak agreed. "But rank does not determine wisdom or capability. You have something that cannot be taught through standard methods. You have the instinct to find survivors, and more importantly, the determination not to give up on them. These are qualities we need to cultivate in all rescue personnel." Commander Okonkwo smiled. "I've already approved the transfer if you accept, Marcus. You'd maintain your rank and salary but would be assigned to the training center on Kepler 7. You'd work with recruits from across the Coalition, teaching them not just the technical aspects of search and rescue, but the philosophy behind it." Marcus's mind raced. It was a significant opportunity, a chance to make a real difference in how the Coalition approached emergency response. But it was also a move away from active field work, from the hands-on rescues that had defined his career. "Can I think about it?" he asked. "Of course," Valak said. "Take the time you need. The program will not launch for several months in any case. We want to ensure it is structured properly." Valak turned to Talara. "As for you, young one, the Guild has a different proposal. Your experience has taught us much, but you have taught us even more. You survived against impossible odds, and in doing so, you have proven that our people are more resilient than we believed." Talara's antenna rose with curiosity. "What are you proposing, Merchant Prince?" "The Guild wishes to establish a new division focused on exploration and research in extreme environments. Places our people have traditionally avoided because they were deemed too dangerous. With the knowledge of this mutation, we now know that some of our people can survive in these places, can push the boundaries of where Velkari can go and what we can accomplish." He paused, letting the words sink in. "We would like you to be part of this initiative, not as a merchant or a navigator, but as an explorer. You would travel to hostile environments, test survival protocols, and help map out new territories for our people." Talara was silent for a long moment. Marcus could see the conflict playing across her features, the subtle shifts in her antenna position that spoke of internal debate. "I almost died," she finally said. "I spent 3 days thinking I would never see my family again, never experience another sunrise, never taste fresh water or feel the humidity of home. It was the most terrifying experience of my life." "I understand if you wish to decline," Valak said gently. "No one would blame you for wanting to return to safer duties after such an ordeal." But Talara was shaking her head. "You misunderstand, Merchant Prince. I am not saying no. I am saying that I understand what it means to truly face death. And because I understand that, I also understand how precious life is, how important it is to use the time we have to accomplish something meaningful." Her antenna straightened. becoming firm and resolute. I accept. I will be your explorer. I will go to these hostile places and prove that the Velkari are stronger than we believed. Because if I can survive 3 days in that frozen cargo hold, then surely our people can survive and thrive in many places we have never dared to venture. Merchant Prince Valak's antenna dipped in approval. Well said. You honor your entire species with this courage. The meeting continued for another hour, discussing logistics and timelines. Marcus found himself warming to the idea of the training program. Yes, it would take him out of active field work, but it would also allow him to multiply his impact. Every rescue worker he trained would go on to save dozens or hundreds of lives. The mathematics of it were compelling. When the meeting finally concluded, Marcus found himself walking with Talara through the station's observation deck. The massive windows looked out onto a stunning view of the Kepler system, with its 7 planets and 2 asteroid belts, creating a complex celestial dance. Do you think I'm crazy? Talara asked suddenly. For accepting the Guild's proposal? My family certainly thinks I am. Marcus considered his answer carefully. I think you're brave. There's a difference between crazy and brave, though sometimes they look similar from the outside. You would know, Talara said. Dr. Yaren told me about some of your other rescues. The pilot who survived 18 days in a damaged escape pod. The child found in the decompressed station section. You have a talent for finding the impossible survivors. Or maybe there are more impossible survivors than anyone realizes, Marcus said. Maybe we just need to look harder, believe a little more. They stood in silence for a while, watching the planets rotate in their orbits. It was peaceful here, far from crashed ships and frozen moons and desperate struggles for survival. I never properly thanked you, Talara said finally, for not giving up on me. For coming back when everyone else had left. Marcus turned to face her. You don't need to thank me for that. But I will tell you something my grandmother used to say. She was a rescue worker too, back on Earth. She used to tell me that every life saved creates ripples that spread outward in ways we can never fully predict or measure. Like dropping a stone in water, Talara said. Exactly. I saved your life, and now you're going to use that life to explore new worlds, to expand the boundaries of what your people believe is possible. And the things you discover, the protocols you develop, the knowledge you gain, all of that will save other lives down the line. The ripples spread outward. Then perhaps, Talara said thoughtfully, those 3 days in the dark were not just about survival. Perhaps they were about learning something important, about discovering that we are all more resilient than we believe, that our limits are often self-imposed rather than genuine. Marcus smiled. Now you're starting to sound like a proper explorer. Questioning assumptions, pushing boundaries, refusing to accept that something is impossible just because everyone says it is. I learned from the best, Talara said. A stubborn human sergeant who refused to believe I was dead. They talked for a while longer, sharing stories and discussing their respective futures. Marcus learned that Talara had 2 younger siblings who looked up to her, that she'd dreamed of seeing distant stars since she was young, that her favorite food was something called spiral grain, which apparently only grew on her homeworld. In turn, he told her about growing up in the ruins of old California, about his grandmother's stories of the quake swarms, about the day he'd decided to join the Coalition Defense Force because he wanted to help people the way his grandmother had. When they finally parted ways, Marcus felt a sense of completion that he rarely experienced after a rescue. Usually, he pulled people out of disasters and then never saw them again, never knew what became of the lives he'd saved. But with Talara, he could see the impact clearly. He'd saved a life that was going to make a real difference in the galaxy. 2 months later, Marcus stood in front of his first class of rescue trainees at the new Coalition Search and Rescue Academy on Kepler 7. The class was diverse, with representatives from 17 different species, all eager to learn the skills that would let them save lives across the galaxy. "The first thing you need to understand," Marcus began, "is that the manual is just a starting point. Procedures are important. Protocols save lives. But they are not the end of the story. The real work of search and rescue happens in the spaces between the rules, in the moments when you have to decide whether to follow the procedure or follow your instincts." A young Karathi raised his hand. "But, sir, how do we know when to trust our instincts over established protocols?" Marcus smiled. "That's what I'm going to teach you. Let me tell you a story about a crashed Velkari merchant ship and a survivor who should have been dead." As he spoke, taking them through the details of Talara's rescue, he could see the trainees leaning forward, engaged and eager. This was going to work. He was going to be able to teach them not just the mechanics of rescue work, but the philosophy behind it. Across the galaxy, on a harsh world of ice and storms that the Velkari had previously deemed uninhabitable, Talara was conducting her first solo exploration mission. Her environmental suit was state-of-the-art, incorporating all the lessons learned from her survival ordeal. Her ship was equipped with the best emergency equipment the Guild could provide. But more importantly, she carried with her the knowledge that she could survive impossible conditions, that her body possessed capabilities she'd never known about, that her species was stronger and more adaptable than they'd ever believed. She activated her comm, sending a message back to the Guild's research station in orbit. "Survey Site Alpha looks promising. Unusual mineral deposits consistent with the preliminary scans. I'm establishing a base camp and will remain on surface for 72 hours to conduct comprehensive analysis." The response came back immediately. "Acknowledged, Explorer Talara. All systems showing green. Stay safe down there." "I survived 3 days in a frozen cargo hold with no supplies," Talara said with amusement in her voice. "I think I can handle a properly equipped exploration mission." She set off across the frozen landscape, her instruments scanning and recording everything. Above her, 3 moons hung in an alien sky. Around her, ice formations created a landscape of stunning, harsh beauty. And within her, ancient genetics hummed with purpose, ready to activate if needed, but hopefully never necessary again. Back on Kepler 7, Marcus finished his lecture and dismissed the class. As the trainees filed out, discussing the rescue story with excitement and wonder, Commander Okonkwo appeared in the doorway. "First day going well?" she asked. "Better than expected," Marcus admitted, "though I'm going to need to work on not making every lesson revolve around that one rescue." "That one rescue changed Coalition rescue protocols," Commander Okonkwo pointed out. "It led to genetic screening across multiple species, discovered hidden survival capabilities, and inspired both a new training program and a new exploration initiative. I'd say it deserves a few lessons." "Fair point." "There's something else," she said, her expression becoming serious. "We received word from the Velkari Guild. They've been conducting more research into that ancient survival mutation. It turns out humans have something similar." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "What?" "You know all those impossible human survivals? People who somehow endure conditions that should kill them? The Guild researchers think it might be a similar mechanism to what Talara has. Humans have their own version of deep suspension, their own ancient survival genetics that activate under extreme duress." "That would explain a lot," Marcus said slowly. "All those stories of humans surviving impossible situations, pushing through when any logical analysis says they should be dead." "The research is still preliminary," Commander Okonkwo cautioned. "But if it's true, it means that what you did for Talara, that refusal to give up on her, might have been partly because you recognized something in her situation, something that resonated with your own species' survival instincts." Marcus thought about all his rescues, all the impossible survivors he'd found. Had he been drawn to them because he unconsciously recognized that spark of desperate survival, that refusal to die that his own species carried in their genetics? "It makes a strange kind of sense," he said finally. "Humans and Velkari, two species from completely different evolutionary paths, both developing similar survival mechanisms because both faced extinction-level threats at critical points in their history. Perhaps that's what the coalition is really about," Commander Okonkwo suggested. "Not just different species working together, but different survivors sharing their hard-won wisdom. Every species in the coalition has their own story of nearly dying out, nearly losing everything. We all carry the scars and the strengths of those ancient struggles." She was right, Marcus realized. The Karathi had survived a plague that killed 90% of their population. The Centaurians had barely made it through an asteroid impact that devastated their homeworld. The Vex had evolved in one of the harshest environments known to coalition science. Every species had its story of survival, its moment when extinction loomed, and somehow they found the will and the way to continue. "Then maybe," Marcus said, "that's what I should be teaching. Not just rescue techniques, but the philosophy of survival. That every species has hidden strengths, unexpected capabilities, ancient wisdom encoded in their genetics that can manifest when it's needed most." "Now you're thinking like an educator," Commander Okonkwo said with approval. "Teach them to look for those hidden strengths, in themselves and in the people they're trying to save. Teach them that impossible is often just a word we use for things we haven't learned to do yet." That evening, Marcus sat at his desk and began planning his next lesson. He pulled up files on remarkable survivals across coalition species, looking for patterns, for commonalities. What he found fascinated him. The Somnathi trader who'd survived 40 days in a damaged cargo pod by entering deep meditation, the human colonist who'd walked 15 kilometers through toxic atmosphere with failing equipment. The Velkari pilot who'd kept her ship flying despite injuries that should have been incapacitating. Every species had their stories. Every species had their impossible survivors, and underlying all of them was that same thread, that refusal to accept death, that determination to keep going even when logic said it was futile. Marcus began writing, trying to capture the essence of what he'd learned. Survival wasn't just about equipment or training or luck, though all of those helped. Survival was about something deeper, something that connected all sentient beings regardless of their evolutionary origin. It was about the choice to keep living, even when living seemed impossible. It was about the refusal to give up, even when giving up would be easier. It was about finding strength in places you didn't know existed, activating capabilities you never knew you possessed. His grandmother had been right. The will to survive was the strongest force in the universe. And now, thanks to a crashed ship, an impossible rescue, and a stubborn Velkari who refused to die, Marcus understood that force better than ever. Outside his window, the stars shone bright against the darkness of space. Out there, somewhere, Talara was exploring new worlds, pushing boundaries, proving that her species could go places they'd never dreamed possible. And here, in this training facility, Marcus was teaching the next generation of rescue workers to never give up on survivors, to always look one more time, to trust that instinct that said someone might still be alive. The ripples spread outward, touching lives across the galaxy, creating impacts that would be felt for generations. One impossible rescue had started it all. One human soldier who refused to accept that everyone was dead. One Velkari who refused to die when death seemed certain. Together, they had proven that impossible was just another challenge waiting to be overcome. And in doing so, they had changed the galaxy in ways both small and profound. One saved life at a time. Marcus smiled and returned to his writing. There was so much to teach, so many stories to share, So many future rescue workers who needed to learn that the greatest tool in their arsenal wasn't equipment or training or even courage. It was the simple, stubborn refusal to give up on people, even when every logical reason said they should, especially then.